Hello, Year 12, and welcome back to our week 12. Scary, isn't it? Week 12. And we're continuing to build knowledge of theory and concepts. And I'm going to actually go straight into a starter. Now, it says here, find and fix the elements that are wrong. So this is another student's attempt to offer a revision card, a Quizlet kind of card on Deborah Tannen, but some elements are wrong. Now, the link between this activity and our mark scheme is that because if you were in with us on Thursday, I've just issued the knowledge organisers, and part of that is the mark scheme. So now I'm going to be really explicit, linking what we're doing to aspects of that knowledge organiser. So it's a point of reference. It just convinces, well, not convinces you, it just proves the rationale, the link between what we're doing and why we need to do it. So on our mark scheme, it says that you can identify researchers by name and make general reference to the research, but then the higher part of the mark scheme says that you can illustrate detailed research findings. So we're going to look to secure those two areas of the mark scheme today. But we're going to start by thinking about how has this student made a mistake. So read through. So this is our who, when, what, how aspect of the card. So this student has said Deborah Tannen is a professor of anthropology. When was she working? In 1978. What did she say that women and men use language differently? How did she say it? Well, she did a sociolinguistic macro-analysis, recording and listening to set up conversations. But, here's our but, there are mistakes here. And actually, one of the things that would stop you qualifying for either of these points on the mark scheme is mistake. Okay, so be careful that we don't fall into that trap. So press pause, take the time you need. Ideally, if you can do it without your notes, better. But if you use your notes, that's still revision, that's still returning. So what bits are wrong and how are we going to correct them? Okay, so Deborah Tannen was not a professor of anthropology, was she? Marjorie Goodwin is professor of anthropology. Deborah Tannen is a sociolinguistic professor, professor of sociolinguistics. So anthropology. So this again reminds us that we're going to have so much potential information on theorists. We need to make sure that right from the start that we are learning the right information attached to the right theorist. Absolutely not working in the 1978s. She was working in the 1980s. Okay, so sometimes with the decade you can be general 80s as opposed to 78. It's easier to do that than make a mistake. So working in 1980s or 1987, but definitely not 1978. Now this bit was correct. What did she contribute? She contributed to our understanding of the D of difference, that women and men use language differently. Now, how? Now this was some of this thing that was an area that I just want to be really cautious of. Sometimes we see associated with theorists some quite big, kind of sophisticated language, and yet we want to be aspirational. We want to use the technical language, but we don't want to misuse it. So this is an example of a student who's misused some quite sophisticated techno language. So how did Deborah Tannen come to her conclusions? She offered a sociolinguistic micro-analysis, not macro. Macro means big, micro means small. So she used micro-analysis. And it said here, recording and listening to set up conversations. No, it wasn't set up conversations. It was natural conversations, naturally occurring conversations. And she was transcribing those conversations as well. So if we were going to correct the how, Deborah Tannen offers a sociolinguistic micro-analysis, recording and transcribing naturally occurring conversations. Inspired, and she says it herself, we looked at this last week, by the work of Lakoff. So Lakoff is also offers a sociolinguistic micro-analysis, recording and transcribing naturally occurring conversations. So both our theorists here are using similar methods. Okay, Goodwin was slightly different. Goodwin was recording and transcribing conversations, but Tannen and Lakoff were looking at adults. Goodwin was recording children. Okay, so what we're going to also look at today then is this side of our knowledge that we need to go from that general reference. So this side, who, when, what, how, represents a general reference. We want to be able to look at illustrated examples in a bit more detail today and to offer a line of challenge. Okay, so there she is. She's saying she's a sociolinguist. She's also an author, speaker. So it's just reminding you some of this information we've had about her. There you go, working in 1987. She studies how people talk to each other and the way we talk affects our relationships. Okay, so she talks again there about Robin Lakoff being inspired by Lakoff. So that's again why we mention the validity of Lakoff. So Lakoff might be the oldest, but she also inspired the work of subsequent study. So Lakoff did inspire people. She was inspirational. Okay, and here we go. So this is what we're going to be looking at today, Deborah Tannen, in terms of illustrated examples and challenge. Now, to do that, to start thinking about illustrated examples, I've got a little challenge for you here. Now, sometimes theorists present their information in tabular data. Now, I know as well, having just sat with some of you on Thursday, you're beginning to analyse your own coursework. Now, one tool that you can use to help you organise and present your data for your coursework is a table very much like this. So it says here, if we look at this, we're looking now to have illustrated examples, so illustrated details, data. It talks about on that mark scheme, illustrated research findings. So this is somebody's research findings. Okay, now it says here across the top that we're looking at topic initiation. So a very micro analytical focus. We're not looking at everything. This research is focused on topic initiation. What does it mean to initiate? Who gets the conversation going? Who introduces a topic into conversation? Now, across the top, it says that out of the group that were being researched, there is either a measure of success, of failure, or of an uncertain outcome. In other words, somebody's going to initiate the topic and it's going to be successful. So a measure of a successful topic initiation is that simply other people talk about what you want them to talk about. So I say, let's talk about EastEnders. People start talking with me about EastEnders. I've been successful in initiating that conversation. If I say, oh, guys, let's talk about EastEnders, and somebody says, nah, Hollyoaks is much more exciting, let's talk about Hollyoaks, my topic has potentially failed. Okay? Now, uncertain means that with any data, when you're recording conversations, you're listening and transcribing, sometimes there can just be uncertainty you can't quite hear or work out. Sometimes it could be that a topic's been introduced and we're not quite sure. The others might be talking about something very similar. So therefore your topic, so actually when I said EastEnders and they said Hollyoaks, they still want to talk about soap opera with me. So that could be an uncertain outcome. If they totally rejected and just started talking about something completely different, cars, clothes, we could argue that that's a definite failure. So that's across the top. Now down here it says that they in this data there's a distinction between men and women. So how men initiate topics and whether they're successful, failure, or uncertain, and whether women initiate topics and whether they're successful, whether they fail, or whether they're uncertain. Now, you've also got two lots of total columns here. So in total, there were 45 successful topic initiations, 28 failures, 3 uncertain moments, and in total, across this whole study, 76 initiations that were looked at. But my question for you, and I'm going to ask you to pause and to think about this, is from the data, what differences can you see in the behaviour of men and women? So how are they behaving differently? So for example, you might write down, well, due to this data, men initiate topics more or less successfully than women. When men initiate topics of conversation, they are always / never successful. So what I want you to do is I want you to give me 3 conclusions. So 3 statements of difference that you can see in the behaviour of men and women based on this data. So to get you started, you can just edit mine so it presents the information correctly, or you can come up with 3 statements of your own. But it's really important when you start looking at data and start thinking about data for your own coursework that you're able to read a table and recognise what validity might be there. So just have a little pause and give me 3 statements in terms of the differences in male and female behaviour. Okay, so what can we see the differences? So if we start with correcting mine, making an assertion based on mine, and then some of the other things you might have come up with. So according to this data, men initiate topics more or less successfully than women. So we look at the table, okay, men are successful 28 times, women are successful 17. So who's more successful? Men. So men initiate topics more successfully than women. So the difference between male and female behaviour is that men are seemingly more successful at getting people to talk about what they want. Okay, now let's look at this one. When men initiate topics of conversation, they are always or never successful. So let's have a look then. So men are successful 28 times and they never fail, according to this data, although there's an uncertainty once. So we could say when men initiate topics of conversation, they are always successful. Okay, now what other things does this data tell us then? That sadly, women fail more than men at getting people to talk about what they want. That women fail more than men in topic initiation. Because look, there's 28 failures for women and no for men. But at the same time, let's just have a look at this in totals, because don't ignore the totals. That men initiate 29 topics and women initiate 47. So women are also different than men because they are initiating more topics. They are seemingly trying to get the conversation going. So we could talk about this in terms of differences because we want to illustrate what differences look like. So differences in male and female behaviour can be seen around topic initiation. And we've got some statements of difference there. Now, we're also going to be thinking about, okay, illustrated examples for the areas of difference that Tannen was drawing attention to. So Tannen gave us these 6 last week, didn't she? Status versus support, independence versus intimacy, advice versus understanding, information versus feelings, orders versus proposals, conflict versus compromise. Now, our job is going to be to try and come up with examples of language that illustrate each of these. Now, it sounds, it's not complicated, but it does take time. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I'm going to ask you to pause and do it for yourself because I want you to have your own examples. So over here, it says status versus support. Men see language as a means of asserting dominance. Women see it as a way of confirming or supporting ideas. So actually, we could say that men are asserting their dominance in conversations by only wanting to talk about what they want, by initiating topics and only seeing other men as successful and rejecting the topics of women. But what does that actually look like in language? So men see language as a means of asserting dominance. For example, when a man says, what can a man say then that's going to assert his dominance? What's a woman going to say as a way of supporting or confirming somebody else's ideas? So this is where we get creative. We can think about things we've seen in TV. We can think about how language works. We can just make something up. So if a man was asserting a dominance, now guys, I'm going to give you a really explicitly obvious one and you can use it or you can come up with your own. I'm in charge. I'm the boss. I think we should do this. I want us to take the A38 home. So any statement like that is an example of asserting dominance. So I'm going to ask you to write down as an example of status and as an example of asserting dominance, the phrase that men might say, I want to take the A38 home. I want to have lasagna for dinner. I am in charge. So any language like that is an example of language that asserts dominance. You're going to write down an example. So you're going to say status, asserting dominance, for example. You're going to write down an example of what that might look like in language. So support. Women see language as a way of confirming or supporting ideas. Absolutely. Let's take the A38 home. Of course, darling. Let's have lasagna for dinner. Lasagna sounds like a good idea. So with these examples, you can connect them in some way. It can be totally different. So we know from Goodwin that supportive language looks like, let us do that together. So let's do that together. Shall we have lasagna for dinner? So anything that confirms or supports ideas. So you're going to write down status, asserting dominance, for example. Support, confirming supporting ideas, for example. So for each of these, you're going to give me a word, an utterance of what that might look like in language. So independence versus intimacy. Men go it alone while women seek support. So intimacy in language looks like or sounds like a woman saying, can you help me? I really need you to sit and talk to me. I would really like us to talk about what happened today. I would really like us to work through this together. There you go. Intimacy, women seeking support. Men going it alone. I just need 10 minutes to get my head together. I just need to go and think about this by myself. That's the language of independence versus intimacy. Right, advice versus understanding. Men see language as problem solving. Women see it as a means of empathy. So quick scenario, okay? You've just failed your driving test. Now, if you're going down the stereotypical route, what advice does dad give? How does mum show understanding? So dad might say something like, let's look